Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I want to start by wishing you a Happy New Year. So do I start calling the 2024 Player's Handbook this year's Player's Handbook? I guess so. We don't have an official release date yet, though they did briefly post this that promises a May 21st release date, but it was quickly taken down. So I think it's fair to speculate that they might be aiming for late May. Okay, so this video might seem to be coming from nowhere, since Paladin Smite was from Playtest 6, so that's months and months ago now, and we're not going to see the Paladin again in any Unearthed Arcana before the new Player's Handbook is released. That was announced by Jeremy Crawford before Playtest 8 was released. So that means the Paladin must have scored a satisfaction rating of 70% or higher on the Playtest 6 survey. Now, that doesn't mean that every individual feature of the Paladin scored that high, and although I can't say with certainty what the Paladin Smite feature scored, I would hazard a guess it didn't do as well as the base Paladin, because I recall a lot of conversation in the community about Paladin Smite, and I remember it being primarily negative. For this reason, I'm also going to hazard a guess that Paladin Smite will likely not be printed in the Player's Handbook the same way we saw it in Playtest 6. So here's how we saw it in the playtest. So Divine Smite was replaced with Paladin Smite, and Divine Smite was turned into a bonus action spell, and the Paladin automatically had access to it and Thunderous Smite at 2nd level, then Shining Smite at 5th, Blinding Smite at 9th, Staggering Smite at 13th, and Banishing Smite at 17th, and they're all bonus action spells. You also got one free Smite spell casting per long rest, and this actually does accomplish some really good things, like it builds in versatility to a feature that previously was Divine Smite and it was just extra damage. And that's terrific. It also kind of standardized all the Smite spells along with Divine Smite, and that's kind of good too. And they wanted to limit us to one Smite on our turn, and making it a bonus action spell does that as well. So there were some good things. However, the community noticed a number of pain points as well. Players didn't like the idea of Divine Smite being a spell at all. They didn't like that Divine Smite could be counterspelled. They didn't like needing to use a bonus action to do a Divine Smite. They didn't like that you couldn't smite with a reaction at all now, since you can't use a bonus action other than on your turn. They didn't like that some of the Smite spells still had clunky mechanics, and some still use concentration. I think it's safe to say that the design team has been made aware of these issues, both through survey feedback as well as online discourse. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Paladin Smite feature gets a major rework in the 2024 Player's Handbook to address some or all of those issues. Someone might even be working on it right now. In this video, I'm going to present one way I think you could address all of those issues, while keeping the versatility offered by Paladin Smite. And of course, I wish I had come up with this right after Playtest 6, but I came up with it recently, and that's why you're seeing it now. Now, I'm sure this could be accomplished in other ways. In fact, the rework I'm going over in this video isn't the original rework I was going to show. Initially, I redesigned the Smite spells, as well as the Paladin Smite feature, in a way that allowed Paladins to cast the spells without using a bonus action, but still carrying forward, the restrictions on number of uses, and combining it with other spells. I think that redesign could have worked, but ultimately I came up with another solution that is less complex. And I think getting rid of complexity whenever it's not really accomplishing anything is ideal. If you like this rework more than the Playtest 6 version, please feel free to use it in your own games. And if you're a patron of this channel, I'll link the document for you on Patreon. If you aren't a patron, feel free to take screenshots. And if you happen to be on the D&D design team, first of all, thanks for watching. But also, any ideas here that you like or you think D&D players would like, please feel free to use this video for some inspiration on things you might do to polish up the feature. I mean, fair enough. I borrowed almost all of this from your redesign of the Smite spells and the Rogue's Cunning Strike. But before we get started on the Paladin Smite rework, speaking of the D&D design team, due to Hasbro layoffs a few weeks ago, the design team lost Dan Dillon, who had been part of the D&D design team for about 5 years, back when the team was like half the size it is now. I bring this up because recently I listened to a Banff podcast where Dan, along with Eitan Bernstein, who was also part of the recent layoffs and was on the editing team of the D&D studio, they had a conversation with Owen Casey Stevens, who worked in game development at Wizards in the early 2000s, and they discussed their layoffs, what it was like working at Wizards of the Coast, and relayed messages to fans of the game as to how to support those who lost their jobs. And I wanted to signal boost some of what they had to say. Like, there'll be about a little bit over 2 minutes worth that I'm going to include in this video. The actual podcast is over an hour, and it's really informative. I'll be linking it in the video description, and I encourage anyone interested to check it out. Speaking of being informative, I do need to issue a correction. I speculated that the laid-off employees would not be receiving compensation in a previous video, and that was incorrect. So, that out of the way, here is Dan, Aton, and Owen.
I'm, crushed about not working there anymore, but it's not going to put me off of D&D. It's not going to stop me from supporting my former teammates who are still there, still putting in the work and putting in even more work now. I want them to be successful. I want D&D to thrive and continue to grow, and for my kids to have the love of it through their life that they had, if they find that with it. I want our former colleagues to be secure in their jobs as possible, and that means if people are into it, please keep buying and supporting D&D.
So perhaps what you're saying is don't boycott them on your behalf.
Absolutely not. Please don't. Like, if you need to for whatever your peace of mind is, fine.
If people are upset about, say, people being laid off, rather than just going and switching all of your support from Wizards to some other place, support the people who are laid off. And it doesn't have to be money. It could just be some nice words, because I got to tell you, when that happens, it makes my day. It might even make my week.
One of my last main tasks was parsing UA survey feedback. So I just want to send a huge shout out to Ron Lundeen and Patrick Rennie, whose job along with me it was to read every single comment. Thousands of them, every survey, y'all. So whoever is talking about, oh, they don't read it, please understand that that's garbage.
And please, no death threats, especially because this happens way too often. Please don't say violent things to Jeremy Crawford. He's an amazing human being who's spends, I don't know when he sleeps, but I do know that no one I've ever met besides, more than Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford are so devoted to this game. Just please don't say nasty. There's nasty things and then there's violent things. Please don't do that. They are not only doing the best they can, they are doing way beyond the best they can.
Be careful when you vent your frustration and anger, because there's almost no way to throw rage at WotC or Wizards without also catching the people on the D&D team in that splash. As someone who got to see an awful lot of it, there were so many people saying things that were so hurtful, and I'm sure they didn't mean them to be, but it's just look, when you let fly with a shotgun, you're gonna cause some collateral damage.
Now, I don't want to comment on that clip too much. I will say I had a discussion with someone after my recent survey video where they said they wouldn't read my comments on the conjure spells since I rated them very satisfied. Can we get past this? I know there were claims early this year that leaks from WotC employees confirmed our comments on the surveys were not being read. This was not an attack on WotC. This was an attack on the design team. So I will stress it again. These dedicated folks read every single comment we write. Period. And I call on any content creator who said otherwise, who hasn't issued a correction so far, to do so. So I'll get back on topic. Let's start with what we have. Here is the playtest 6 version of Paladin Smite. You have mastered smiting your targets with divine energy. You always have certain spells ready. When you reach your Paladin levels specified in the Smite spells table, you thereafter always have the listed spells prepared. In addition, you can cast one of your prepared spells from this feature without expending a spell slot, and you must finish a long rest before you use this benefit again. So the first thing I'm going to do is revert Paladin Smite back to Divine Smite. So this is almost the playtest 4 version of Divine Smite. When you strike a target, you can channel Divine Energy to smite it. Immediately after you hit a target with an attack roll using a melee weapon or an unarmed strike, you can expand 1 spell slot to deal radiant damage to the target. So in playtest 4, Divine Smite could be done with any weapon, and they've switched that to melee weapons only, so I've made that change here as well. And the damage is 2d8 for a first level spell slot, plus 1d8 for each slot level higher than first. You can use Divine Smite no more than once during a turn, and you can't use it on the same turn that you cast a spell using your bonus action. Okay, so I have made one additional change here from playtest 4. It originally didn't let you cast on the same turn you cast any spell. I said a spell using your bonus action because I think what they were trying to prevent was stacking Divine Smite with a Smite spell. So essentially you end up smiting twice with the same attack. Smite spells use bonus actions exclusively, so this wording accomplishes that. But you can smite with a Booming Blade attack or something like that. But it's mostly the same as playtest 4 for now. Now for the stuff I added. We're going to add one more second level feature, Paladin Smite. And obviously I'm just stealing the name, consider it a placeholder and call it whatever you like. And the wording here, I'll just say right off the bat, is totally ripped off of the Cutting Strike feature. Second level Paladin's Smite. You have developed new ways to use your Divine Smite. When you deal Divine Smite damage, you can add one of the following Paladin Smite effects. Each effect has a die cost, which is the number of Divine Smite damage dice you must forego to add the effect. You remove the die before rolling, and the effect occurs immediately after the attack's damage is dealt. For example, if you add the Thunderous effect, remove 1d8 from the Divine Smite damage before rolling. So we get two options. First is Thunderous, cost 1d8. The damage type of the Divine Smite is Thunder damage. The target must make a strength saving throw against your spell save DC or be pushed 10 feet away from you and be prone. Notice prone is underlined because it appears in the glossary. And then Wrathful, cost 1d8. The damage type of Divine Smite is Psychic damage. The target must make a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC or be frightened until the start of your next turn. Now, Wrathful Smite was not part of the Paladin Smite feature. By including it here, we're going to have two options right at level 2. Then at 9th level, we will get Improved Paladin Smite. And honestly, I didn't spend any time coming up with cool, flavorful names for the scaling features, so if you come up with something, use it. Shining, cost 2d8. The target must make a dexterity saving throw against your spell save DC, or it sheds light in a 5-foot radius until the start of your next turn. During this period, it can't benefit from the invisible condition, and all attack rolls against it have advantage. And Blinding, cost 2d8. The target must make a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC or have the blinded condition until the start of your next turn. So you can see how I've kind of worked it here. As the cost increases, the effects become more significant. And finally, at 17th level, we're going to have Supreme Paladin Smite. Staggering, cost 3d8. The damage type of Divine Smite is Psychic damage. The target must succeed on a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC or be stunned until the start of your next turn. And Banishing, cost 3d8. The damage type of the Divine Smite is Force damage. The target must succeed on a Charisma saving throw against your spell save DC or be transported to a harmless demiplane. Target with more than 50 hit points remaining reappears at the start of your next turn in the space it left or the nearest unoccupied space if that space is occupied. So you can see there, if you happen to banish a creature and it has less than 50 hit points after your smite, it's never coming back unless it can do some kind of planar travel. Okay, so before I go over how I think this addresses all the pain points of the playtest 6 Paladin Smite, I should say this does not replace any of the smite spells. They would still exist because there's some NPC in some published book somewhere that has the Staggering Smite spell or something, and so you still need a Staggering Smite spell. That said, what this rework feature does is really opens the doors for reworking those spells to differentiate them from smiting through this feature. Durations, concentration, that's all okay if the Paladin doesn't have to rely on those spells to make their smite more interesting. The one smite spell that would be going away is Divine Smite, because there would be no purpose to have it anymore. Anyways, the pain points. We didn't like that Divine Smite could be counterspelled. Well, since it's not a spell anymore, that's not a problem. In fact, now you can do stuff that could be counterspelled even with the 2014 rules without that issue. We didn't like needing to use a bonus action to do a Divine Smite. That is taken care of. We didn't like that you couldn't use Smite with a reaction attack at all, since you couldn't use a bonus action other than on your turn. That is also taken care of, and you can now do things with like a held attack action that you previously couldn't. We didn't like that some of the smite spells still had clunky mechanics, and some still use concentration. So, like I said, the smite spells are still going to exist, and probably will need further redesign, But the emulation of the spells here is simply worded, accomplishes what it should, and none use concentration. I also want to talk about the balance for a bit. So Smite spells are hard to balance because ultimately they fill a similar function for a Paladin that Divine Smite does, and they use the same resource, spell slots. But when you look at something like a Thunderous Smite that uses d6s for damage and then adds d6s when you cast it with a higher level slot, what that means is the save or be pushed and knocked prone effect becomes more and more expensive when you use a higher level slot compared to Divine Smiting with the same level slot. With this version, it's just really easy to see exactly what the cost of each added effect is without changing that cost by using a higher level slot. So save or be pushed and knocked prone is worth a d8 damage. Whether smiting with a first level slot or a 5th level slot, the cost is the same. Sacrificing a d8 gives a relatively minor secondary effect, 2d8 is a bit more substantial, and then 3d8 the most substantial. Not sure if the balance is perfect, because the value of these effects maybe isn't perfectly represented with d8s, but I think we get about as close to balancing them as is possible. And I was able to standardize a bunch of stuff. Durations are always until the start of your next turn, everything gets a saving throw, and nothing uses concentration. Now, it should be obvious, if you've been following the playtest, that this redesign is basically me ripping off the Rogue's Cunning Strike and reshaping it for Divine Smite. And yes, that is what this is. And I think it works pretty well. But I would love your thoughts. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Earlier in this video, I talked about layoffs at Wizards of the Coast. I fortunately still have my job, and that is thanks to the patrons of this channel. So today I want to thank Airhead and Alex R, Vo, Bloody Nine, Therazone, CJ, Chris C, Coral, Thank Train, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Eric Wasserman, Evan Getting, FPK05, Gilad Artsy, Gishlife, Lightfoot, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jiriru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Lars V, Mark D, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Speed Shadow, Thunderlock, and William Whittles. And to anyone who supports this channel, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to continue supplying content throughout this year.